Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Today's episode is another Q&A from some of my listeners, and it's brief. This is just a mini episode to keep you going. I'm answering questions about earth medicine and how to interpret symbols and my journey with earth medicine, and then answering an astrological question. Now, I'm not an astrologer, but I know a little bit, and I wrote some notes down from Chandy Nicholas, so hopefully it's not too much just regurgitation, but I wanted to answer that question for y'all. So enjoy this episode, and I will talk to you soon. Shannon Bates asked, I would love to know more about your earth medicine journey, how you personally recognize and find meaning in the gifts Gaia offers you. So my earth medicine journey, and in terms of formal study, started in 2012. And I think, though, that it would be remiss of me not to talk about how connected I was to nature as a kid. And I grew up in a kind of rural area that was getting developed, like farmland that was being sold and developments were put on. So at the time that I grew up, there was, 20 houses in the middle of farmland, and then farmhouses kind of spread out a couple miles or half a miles away from each other. And so there was a lot of woods, there was hills, streams and creeks and dams, and we would find old houses abandoned. And I grew up in a time too, which was like the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, where parents were just like, go, why are you at home? And so I had this pack of kids I ran with, which was everybody in the neighborhood. No one was really excluded, or nobody, we just all ran together. And we would go explore places. We found a spring, and we find this, and we would just go and turn over rocks and make games out in the woods, or we'd catch minnows and go fishing. And I was just very connected to nature. And my parents weren't super outdoorsy people or anything, but I was in Girl Scouts. And I think probably the biggest thing was my grandmother lived on what's called game lands in Pennsylvania. So she had a couple acres, but then it was butt up against the woods. And so my sister and I would go into the woods, and we had like a whole universe there. And we would play for hours and hours, and we would talk about, fairies and what we were just totally at one there. That was our place. And it was very comforting. I was just telling my husband, because we were hiking, and it was very mossy where we were hiking. And in this part of the woods that my sister and I loved to play in, there was there were vines hanging down, so we could sit. They were like a swing, and we would sit there and swing. And there was a little lifted up area with rocks and big trees and roots and everything. And it was full of really soft moss. And so I would lay there and pretend to sleep. And it would be like my home, and that would be my bed. That's how I envisioned it. But the smell of moss was just so strong. And the reason it came up is because my husband grabbed some moss and said, smell this. This is so good for you to smell. And it was like an immediate, visceral reaction of going back to laying in the moss as a child. So I had a very strong connection with nature and earth, and we would dig for rocks and find crystals. And my mom was connected with crystals and some new agey thoughts. I was raised Catholic, but my parents are very cool. And so, I did get away from being in nature, I think, as I got to be a teenager and stuff like that wasn't that important to me. But we would skip school and then go on hikes, probably to smoke cigarettes or whatever. But I would go up to Bake Oven Knob, which is a place in Pennsylvania that's very rocky. It's really such a beautiful outlook. We'd go to the Pinnacle, which is another hike. We'd go to Hog Mountain, we'd just do these things just to kind of get out of school. Like we would literally skip school and go there. So then I went to the desert and I was introduced to a whole other landscape. And I moved to Tucson, Arizona. I had 2 years of college. Then I moved to Tucson, Arizona. I met my husband in Philly, and he lived there, my first husband, Guillermo. And so I meet Guillermo in Philly. He goes back to Tucson, and we start writing love letters. And then I moved to Tucson, and I lived there for 5 years. And in that 5-year time, like, he introduced me to the medicine of the desert. And, he was a big hiker and outdoors person. And we would just after work one day, we would drive out to the desert, sleep in the truck. We had a sleep in the back of the truck with nothing covering us. And then we would drive back in the morning for work. We loved being out in the woods. And being introduced to the medicine of the desert was very different to the medicine of Pennsylvania. And so learning all the different parts of the desert, and Guillermo was really good about knowing the herbal medicine and how to use certain things. And, the Sonoran Desert is different than any other desert. It is lush and full of life. Everything is alive. And even when it's all dried, it looks like nothing's alive. And then all of a sudden a rain happens and everything blooms, and that smell of creosote is so strong, and just everything is healing, and everything's built for survival. And I was very raw when I was in the desert. I was like a broken open, my heart was just ugh. And I had to heal from a lot. And maybe that was the first time I realized how broken I was, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I meant okay, I have to figure out how to put myself together. And during that time was, I got into meditation. Well, I was into meditation before I left, but really into it. And I studied with a lot of different, religious people like Hare Krishnas, and going to Wiccan or, pagan circles, Native American circles. My husband's Yaqui. My first husband was Yaqui. So, I was introduced to different kinds of spirituality that was connected to the earth. And that opened me up. But, when I went back to college, I studied religion, and I really was interested in how people made sense of the earth and the interconnectedness with God. And especially in ancient Greek religion was really something that fascinated me, or ancient Egyptian religion, and some of the cults and how they worked with the earth. So I was really interested in that stuff. But, I lived in Philadelphia when I moved back, and I was very disconnected from nature. I would ride my bike, and I was a road rider. So I was like a distance cyclist. And so, that's a kind of strange. You're in nature, but you're also not in nature because you're on a road that was built, and your tires are itty bitty, and you're trying to go as fast as you can. And that was that defines me, going as fast as I can. But through all those times, I would have these incredible spiritual, magical experiences with the earth. One of them I remember as a child, my sister and our friend and I, there's a tree out in the middle of the cornfields. There's a lot, when you're driving through cornfields, you'll see just a tree in the middle. And we were let's go to that tree. So you run through the cornfield, and you get cut up. And running through cornfields, if you've never done it, is not everybody's cup of tea. You can't see beyond yourself. Somebody could be two rows away from you, and you might not see them. So it's hard to sort of, especially when you're short and you're a kid, to see above. So we were trying to find the tree. It was going through a maze. And we finally get to the tree, and we sit down. We're all huffing and puffing, and I sit back, and I feel something crawling on me, and I turn, and my entire hand is covered with ladybugs. And the entire tree roots were covered with thousands and thousands of ladybugs. And it was so magical. I cannot explain the awe and wonder that I had of that day. It's still one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And it's funny because now here in Pennsylvania, I live also around a lot. It's not the same place I grew up in, but it's similar. And there's fields across the street from me. And in the fall, I guess, we have so many ladybugs in our house. Like it looks like that sometimes, like right at the windows, they're all over. Because I don't know if they release them, but it's magical. And now, that's kind of a symbol of my daughter who passed over. So it's just awesome when we're sitting here and a ladybug lands on us, because it is such a important image for me. But I did always look for meaning in nature, and I am very good at picking out patterns. And so, like, for example, I didn't realize this, but I'm really good at finding four-leaf clovers. And I was seeing a psychic the one time, and she said, "Can you find four-leaf clovers?" And I was like, "Yes, I do find them a lot." She said, "That means you're very good at picking out patterns." And once I kind of had a name for that, I understood, oh, this is what I do all the time. So I, think that the ADHD brain, the neurodivergent brain, is, and this is just my pet theory, very good at that, very good at picking out like subtle movements. I mean, you can call it trauma, you can call it hypervigilance, you can call it neurodivergence, or you could just be like, okay, you're connected to the medicine of the earth, or all those things, So I'm really good at subtle movements. So when we're out hiking, I'm the one that sees like the snake, the frog, the turtle, which birds, and that was another thing. My stepfather is a birder. So from my teenage years, maybe my early 20s, when I would come visit, we would go birding. And he is not good at hearing high sound. So I would listen for sounds and point and see just like a little movement of the bird. And we would, so I would kind of be his ears for that. And I'm just very good at seeing things. The other thing that I have done in my life is be a lucid dreamer. And lucid dreaming, if you don't know what it is recognizing you're in a dream when you're in a dream. And then secondly, I can change the dream as I'm lucid dreaming. So once I recognize it's a dream, then I'll be like, oh, it's a dream, I can fly. And then I would fly. So when I got into dreams and dreaming and reading about lucid dreaming, I was a teenager. And one of the things that I started getting really into was dream interpretation. And so when I would study dream interpretation, what I would study is like, so what does that symbol mean for me? What does this symbol mean for me? And I would keep a dream journal, and I've done that since I was like 15 or 16. So, those kind of that symbolic language of my dream is the same symbolic language that I use when I do tarot readings or psychic readings. I use that same kind of symbology to understand why the medicine is coming that way. And the other thing I do is look for those same symbols out in nature, right? They're all connected for me. So that was part of how I started recognizing and finding meaning in earth, in the medicine of the earth. I also do the like daydreaming 100-yard stare thing where I'll just like look at like a tree with all the leaves, and my eyes will go like fuzzy and out of focus, and I'll see that all of the branches are making like a word or a symbol for me. And then I interpret that. Okay, today that's what's coming up. And I actually have to be sitting like in meditation with my eyes open, or daydreaming or whatever. How did I understand what I was doing was when I started having a formal study. And one of the things that was first coming to me was I started doing, and it's kind of like a weird, I think I talk about it in another Q&A where somebody asked me what my origin story was, but I started by taking Athena, Paracas, the sage goddesses, magical sabbatical, and then that opened me up to all these other teachers because she talks about all these other teachers. And honestly, like I ended up resonating really so much with Pixie Lighthorse, and at the time she was Pixie Campbell, but at the Athena was Pixie's student in Soul Lodge. So Soul Lodge had started a number of years before, And I found it because Athena talked about Pixie and that community. And so once I found Pixie, that was it. Pixie was talking the language that I had already been understanding for myself. So when I started journeying, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like lucid dreaming for me, except much more powerful because I'm awake. So I can really pick out what's happening. And so she was very essential in kind of reassuring me that my interpretations were the most important. And so she started by doing Soul Lodge, and she would do these like little classes like, gold mining the shadow with Black Panther, or boundaries and protection with Mountain Lion, or voice with Raven. That was in 2014. 2013, every month she would send like an animal to work with. And that was very helpful for me because that's how I started learning, oh, this is the medicine. And I understand, okay, like this is what octopus does in journey world, in real life. And we can ask them to be our assistants rather than always like outward looking. I'm never going to interact with an octopus in real life, probably, unless I go to the ocean, which I don't live near the ocean right now. So that was interesting too, to be like, oh, I can work with these in journey world. I also, studied with Rita Strauss. I studied angel channeling and working with the ascended masters and the rays, and she's my Reiki master. And so I learned more of the upper world stuff from her, and interpreting visions and psychic understanding, which really is the same as finding meaning in the gifts of the earth. They're all the same symbolic language, and everyone has their own symbolic language, which I think is really important. But working with Pixie, she did Soul Lodge, and then she started Soul Lodge Earth Medicine School. And when she did that, I signed up for each one of those levels. She has 4 levels. Like I was the first of the class of like Soul Lodge Earth Medicine School. And I think like Maya Toll was in my class, and there was a bunch of other people that now have gone on to have their own practices and things. But in the first level of Soul Lodge Earth Medicine School, she taught us how to understand the medicine. Okay, so maybe I should do a little explanation too about what is the medicine. I mean, when we talk about medicine, what we're talking about, there's this sacred, mysterious, supernatural power that exists in all things. And so if we think everything is sacred, mysterious, and has a power that exists, and we're all connected, we have this myth of separation that we're trying to unravel in our lifetime, then we allow Spirit to talk to us and heal us through everything. And so some of this is Pixie's words, like medicine is the thread that which moves through all matter to connect all things. Okay, that's one of Pixie's quotes. And so I think, or maybe I paraphrased it, but that medicine that moves through all matter to connect all things means that anything you interact with is going to be a kind of medicine for you. But, and this is the thing that Pixie always reinforced, if you don't change or gain insight from it, or you don't interact with it, it's not your medicine. So if I see a squirrel that runs across my path, okay, I saw a squirrel today. Is that my medicine? Well, I'm not focusing on what gifts and what squirrel is doing that's going to make me rise, right? This is going to make me change. If I was going to work with squirrel medicine, I'm going to work with this idea that I am packing stuff away for the future. They're hyper vigilant. They're very twitchy. The reason is because they're prey. They're prey animals. And so we interpret by understanding how that animal exists in the world, or that plant or the crystal. How do they exist? Where do they come from? What is the medicine they have? Right? So when we're looking at plant medicine, for example, you may say, okay, does it have a thorn? Is it poisonous? How is it used? How do the animals use it? Bear eat herbs to heal themselves, and to work with different things. So we kind of look at where it comes from, how it grows, where, is it a nocturnal thing? Is it a daylight thing? How does it exist in the world? Because when we think of animal medicine, and I'm kind of also answering, like, I think Crystal Healer asked in December, can you talk about spirit animal medicine? And, I think that's a term that a lot of people are moving away from, just because it's a native term. But if you're using the idea of an animal bringing wisdom and medicine to us, we embrace the idea and the awareness that when we're interacting with that animal, they may be our medicine, but we also may be their medicine, right? Because it's interconnected. So the key to understanding animal medicine, how you start interpreting that, is to understand how the animal behaves in its environment. And then working with their animal-like beings. They're not like Tony the Tiger talking to you. It's great. It's not that way. I mean, I've had students who have like animals that come up like a cartoon. And, while I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because it's very childlike, in some ways it's our human tendency to anthropomorphize animals, and it's very easy to do. But when we're working with it as medicine, we're letting ourselves be in the animal's environment rather than the other way around. So I hope that answered your question. I feel like I was very wordy, and I apologize for that. But you asked me, how do I personally recognize and find meaning? I just say everything is the medicine for me. So when I'm interacting with something, I kind of look at it and like, oh, what do I have to learn from that right now? And again, like, that subtle awareness of movement and catching the eye of things makes me open to a lot more medicine than someone that's like very myopic and looking at their car. When I'm walking to my car, I'm looking at the trees, what birds are out, what's flying overhead, what's on the ground, what's going on. Like I said, that could be like hypervigilance or ADHD or whatever. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but like I was watching, I think it was TikTok or something, and someone was saying that people with ADHD would have been the hunters in a society. So we're highly attuned to seeing subtle movement. And I love that idea. I don't know if it's true, but I like that idea that, all of these things that we're like labeling disorders or whatever were actually used in, a community. So that's my journey with earth medicine. I hope I explained that okay. But yeah, studying with Pixie Lighthorse was oh gosh, so amazing. And I've taken, a class or two with Alberto Villoldo. I'm taking his like online stuff, and I love his approach, but it's different. Pixie had a very earthy. It was just perfect for me, and she was such a good space holder, and so I'm very honored to be part of her trained individuals. So that's it. Melanie Russell asked, hi Angie, what's the significance of the rising sign and the 12th house? I have my birth chart and they said I'm an Aries with Leo rising and Cancer in my 12th house, and I don't know what to do with that information. Okay, so your astrological birth chart is basically like the snapshot of the sky from Earth at the exact moment you were born. And that's why they ask you your time, your date, and where you were born, because it's also different. The vantage point is different from where you were born. Okay, so each house in your chart is ruled by a different sign depending on your time, date, and location, right? So basically, when you're talking about the houses are what kind of ground the astrology in your daily life, okay? So when we look at the zodiac wheel or the wheel of the houses, the first house, which represents where the sun was rising over on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth, that then governs yourself, your identity, and the first impression you give. and then it goes clockwise around. Okay. So that's why the rising sign is always in your first house. Okay. So how do I explain this? Okay. Basically, every zodiac chart is divided into 12 signs, and it's also divided into 12 houses. So if you start the first house is your rising sign, then you go around the wheel. So my rising sign is Gemini. So my first house is in Gemini. Okay. My second house then is in Cancer. So you're going in order, right? My third house is in Leo. My fourth house is in Virgo. My fifth house is in Scorpio. So you can kind of figure out where you are in the house. And now I believe that's the whole sign way they do it. So there are different astrological approaches. So to do a chart, and the whole house approach is kind of like an older, some people say outdated way of doing it, but I really resonate with Chani Nicholas, and she uses the whole house. So I kind of use the whole house because that's it. So I think the way you remember the houses are like, think about those things that are important to you. All right. So let me tell you, I'm going to try to find, okay, let me just say this. This is what Chani Nicholas says about what the 12 houses represent. So the planets are the characters. So think of the planets like Mars. He is the god of war, right? And he's fiery and blah, blah, blah. The signs are the costumes they're wearing, okay? So if Mars is in Capricorn, Mars is wearing a business suit. So his anger is around, finances and money and, rules, because Saturn rules Capricorn. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the houses are the areas of life where this whole play is getting played out, where the planets are expressing their energy is in the style of the sign they're in, and where they're going to show up is the house, like how they're going to show up in your life. So you can look at the sign and house placements for every planet in your chart and kind of figure out like how they're going to play out. Okay. But the sun represents like our essential self. That's your sun sign, is what most people say. That's my sign. My sign is my Capricorn. That's where the sun was when I was born. It was January 4th. The sun was in Capricorn. So the sun represents like our essential self and the core part of our life's purpose. The house that the sun is in will tell you what part of your life purpose is going to be lived out and where you need to express yourself. So for example, I'm going to quick look at my chart. My first house, so my sun, Capricorn, is in my 8th house. And the 8th house is the house of death, mental health, and other people's resources. Okay? So what the heck does that mean? Well, it means that, okay, so Mercury is in Capricorn in my 8th house. Mercury is how I communicate in Capricorn, which is a disciplined, self-restricting style, in the 8th house of death, mental health, and other people's resources. And I think that means, I'm very comfortable talking about dark things and helping people through shadow and helping people open up and deal with trauma and all that stuff. The most important houses there's 4 essential ones that people look at, okay? The first house, then the 10th house, the 7th house, and the 4th house are generally considered the most important. The first house is probably the most personal of all the houses because it deals with yourself, okay? Whereas other sections of the chart are basically dedicated to those parts of your life. So that the first house is about our body, our ego, our vitality, and how we look, okay? So that means your rising sign is always going to be in your first house with the whole house method. Now, the 10th house is the public house. This is your career and prestige and your job. So with a lot of planets like in the 10th house, for example, you might want to get recognition for your work. So this is where we share our gifts in a public manner. And then if we go back to the fourth house is probably the most private of our houses because it deals with our home and our ancestry and our lineage and where we come from. And it's associated with your home. So for example, in my fourth house, where is my fourth house? Let me find that. 1, 2, 3, 4 is Virgo. So my fourth house is in Virgo, which is probably why my life is so organized, so to speak. And then, okay. And then that was our last one to worry. The 7th house is the other one that's important, which is our relationship house. It's where we go for information. If you have planets in this house, it puts an emphasis on a partnership life, someone who grows through partnerships. I'm going to look at my 7th house, and my 7th house probably has nothing in it. It has DC, a descendant, in Sagittarius in the 7th house of committed partnerships. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your 12th house. And you were told that your 12th house is you're in Aries, a fire sign, that's your sun. Leo rising, that's also a fire sign. That's highly public. It's very confident and direct. So all those fire, and then Cancer's in your 12th house, meaning that you have water now in your 12th house. Okay. Now let's talk about what the 12th house does. So if you have when you have planets in your 12th house, you need private time to work through things. And the house is associated with the unconscious, with your dreams. So it's like, if you have Cancer in this house, that means when you're working through emotional things, watery things, psychic things, you need to do it alone in private. Okay. So you're kind of looking at what's in that house. And I think I have a lot in my 12th house, to be perfectly frank. Mars in Taurus is in my 12th house. So what that means is that Mars is how I take action. And so in Taurus, it's grounded and stabilizing. Okay. And it's in my 12th house of my hidden life, my secrets, my unconscious. And so Mars in Taurus is not good. That's not a good, great connection. So, yeah, I can't keep secrets, I guess. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with everything, but I would say that you need private time to process emotions and things like that. But again, I'm using the whole house, and I don't know what the person who did your reading is using. You can get free chart like with the whole house on Chani Nicholas's app or on her website. And it's really fun to be able to do and understand our charts a little more. So I hope that helped. I should maybe go through all the houses. So where am I here? Okay. First house is of your self. Like I said, your body, your ego, your vitality, how you look. The second house is value, ownership, possession, and finances. And so if you have a birth chart with a lot of emphasis on that house, meaning there's a lot of planets in that house, establishing security is really important for you. Having, a solid, safe place to be and go is important. The third house is about distance, traveling, the communication, people around you. This is like a house of movement, right? It also deals with like neighbors and siblings, which is interesting. So the fourth house it says it's the most private of the astrological houses because it deals with our home ancestry lineage, where we come from, like I said. The fifth house is a fun house. It's creativity, pleasure, delight, merriment. It also gives us your approach to romance and sex. The sixth house is associated with illness and menial tasks. So a lot of times this is like talked about as the like house of self-care and wellness. The seventh house is where you go for information on partnerships and relationships and things like that. Your eighth house is about finances, taxes, investments, debt. And this is also associated with intimacy and more modern astrological interpretations. The ninth house is with another travel, but it's like more like long distance travel, whereas like this is about like how you expand your mind, how you study, education, how you learn about the world. The 10th house deals with career and prestige and high level jobs. The 11th house is the house that gets labeled for friendship and networking, but it actually was used for good fortune, and Jupiter is kind of associated with this house. So if you have Jupiter in this house, it's awesome. It means you are good at manifesting and bringing things together. And then the 12th house is the house of, the privacy and emotional work that you do. So I hope that helped, and I will talk soon.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.